Good day, this is Teacher Ian, and I will still be your teacher in science for grade 4. Before we start, let's have our vocabularies. Please read and follow after me. Number 1. Reproduction. 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 Spell reproduction. R-E-P-R-O-D-U-C-T-I-O-N. Reproduction. Number 2. Pollination. 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 Spell pollination. P-O-L-L-I-N-A-T-I-O-N. Pollination. Number 3. Fertilization. 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 Spell fertilization. 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 Our lesson for today is all about reproduction, pollination, and fertilization. What is a reproduction? Reproduction is the biological process by which new individual organisms or offspring are produced from their parent or parents. Reproduction is a fundamental feature of all known life. Each individual organisms exist as the result of reproduction. The process of reproduction involves two main structures of a plant, the male and the female. The male part is the stamen. That includes the anther and the filament. The anther produces the pollen, and the filament supports for the anther. The female part is the pistil. That includes the stigma, the style, and the ovary. The stigma is the sticky bulb that catches the pollen grains. The style is the passageway for the pollen. And the ovary is the part of the pistil that holds the eggs, awaiting for fertilization, and that becomes the fruit. So those were the male and female reproductive parts of a flower. Now let's come to the pollination. What is a pollination? Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the male structure of a plant to the female structure of a plant. There are two kinds of pollination, the self-pollination and the cross-pollination. The self-pollination happens when the pollen that lands on the stigma is from the same plant. And the cross-pollination happens when the pollen that lands on the stigma is from a different plant.
By now, we know how sexual reproduction in plants takes place. This is what we've learned. The flower, which is the reproductive organ of the plant, bears the male and the female parts. The male part, the stamen, contains the male gamete, while the female part, the pistil, has the female gamete. Fusion of the two gives rise to an embryo. Now let's get to know how exactly the process occurs. Let's learn about it in detail. But before that, tell me one thing. Do all flowers always possess both the floral parts together? Some of them do. What do we call the types of flowers which possess both the male and the female floral parts together? Flowers which contain both stamen and pistil together are called bisexual flowers. Can you name a few examples of such types? Rose, China rose are a few in this category. What about other flowers then? Don't they contain both the male and the female floral parts together? Some flowers, such as those of gourd and pumpkin, possess either stamen or pistil. That is the reason why such flowers are called unisexual flowers. Now getting back to the process, the first step is that of pollination. It is the process by which pollen grains are transferred to the female reproductive organs of a plant. In other words, pollen from the anther are transferred to the stigma. Does this process occur only between two flowers of the same type? Yes, that is correct. Pollination occurs between the flowers belonging to the same type. And does that mean pollination occurs only between two flowers born on the same plant? That question leads us to the types of pollination. The type in which pollination occurs between flowers born on the same plant is called as self-pollination. So what will the next type be? The other type of pollination is called cross-pollination, where the pollens travel from the anther to the stigma of a different flower on another plant. Can you guess how this process of transfer of pollen grains occurs? For this, there are several agents which aid the process. Agents such as wind and water are the abiotic ones. On the other hand, biotic pollinators such as bees, bats, moths, and birds also help in the process. The process of pollination makes sure that the pollen grain safely lands on the stigma. But what happens next? Does this lead to fertilization directly? Or are there any intermediate steps?
Let's move now to fertilization. What is fertilization? Fertilization is the process where the male's pollen grains fuse together with the female's ovules inside the ovary and become one new cell.
Fertilization in plants. When the pollen grains mature, they escape and reach the stigma of the flower by pollination. The pollen tube grows and enters the ovule through micropyle. The pollen tube enters into the cavity of the ovary and then the ovule and finally penetrates the wall of the embryo sac. Embryo sac contains 8 nuclei. 2 nuclei present in the center are called polar nuclei. 3 nuclei surrounded by cytoplasm form the egg apparatus towards the micropylar end, and the remaining 3 on the other pole form antipodal cells. Fertilization is the process of fusion of male gamete with female gamete. During this process, the pollen tube discharges the male cells into the embryo sac. One of the male gamete fuses with egg to form a diploid zygote, and this is called syngamy. The second male gamete fuses with diploid secondary nucleus to form the endosperm nucleus. Since this process includes 2 fusions, this is called double fertilization. Endosperm nucleus is formed by fusion of 3 nuclei. Since it involves 3 nuclei, it is called triple fusion.
Hi kids! Today we will learn about pollination and fertilization in plants. So let's start. We learned that all living beings reproduce. That is, all living things give birth to the same kind. And similarly, plants too reproduce their own kind. And most of the plants reproduce through seeds. That is, they produce seeds which when it germinates and produces a new plant. Let's see how these seeds are produced. We learned the structure of a flower in our last assignment. This is pedicel, which is a green color stalk. Then this broader part is a receptacle, and all other parts are arranged in 4 whorls. Tootway has thousands of animated videos on math, English, and science to clear the core basics of these subjects. The first whorl is of green sepals. Second is colorful petals. Third is stamens, which is the male reproductive part. Fourth is carpel or pistil, which is the female reproductive part. Stamen consists of a long stalk called filament and a swollen head called anther. It consists of numerous very small pollens, which are male reproductive cells. Pistil consists of a sticky structure called stigma, attached to a long tube-like structure called style, and style ends in a swollen part called ovary. And this ovary contains the female reproductive cells, ovules. When pollens from the anther of stamen joins with the ovules present in the ovary, we call it fertilization. Let's revise. When pollens from the anther of stamen joins with the ovules present in the ovary, it is called fertilization. And fertilization forms the seeds inside the ovary. And after fertilization, this ovary changes into a fruit. That's why seeds are there inside the fruit. Now let's see what is pollination. Pollination is a process by which pollen is transferred from the anther, that is, the male part, to the stigma, which is the female part of the plant, thereby enabling the fertilization and reproduction in turn. Now let's see how pollination occurs or how pollens reach stigma. There are various ways. How do pollens reach the stigma? Flowers have bright petals and strong fragrance that attract insects and other animals. Also, flowers have thin, nutritious honey-like liquids called nectar inside of them that acts as food for many insects. Butterflies, bees, and many other insects feed on the nectar. So they visit the flower to suck nectar. While sucking nectar from the flowers, they are in no way harmed by the insects. Insects feed on the nectar present in the flowers. Tootway has thousands of animated videos on math, English, and science to clear the core basics of these subjects. And while doing so, the pollens from the anther gets attached to the body of the insects. And when these insects visit some other flower for nectar, pollens get to the sticky top of the pistils, and by the way of long tubes called style. Pollens reach the ovary where ovules are present, and fertilization occurs, leading to the formation of seeds. So this process of pollens reaching the sticky tops of pistils is called pollination. And pollens may reach to the stigma of the same flower or stigma of different flowers. When pollens reach the stigma of the same flower, it is called self-pollination. And when pollens reach the stigma of different flowers of the same kind, it's called cross-pollination. So kids, we now know what is fertilization and what is pollination. Now we will learn about different agents of pollination. Insects like bees, butterflies, beetles, etc. are the main agents of pollination. Birds and mammals too pollinate some flowers. Wind also acts as an agent of pollination. Water too acts as an agent of pollination. So kids, today we learned about fertilization and pollination.
For our activity, I will be sending it into our line group. As always, don't forget to wash your hands, wear your mask, and observe social distancing. Stay at home. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.